So welcome to Schedule Building with Athabasca University. This webinar is hosted by the Network of Assistive Technologists on this Friday, the 28th of August, 2020. And we welcome Catherine Butts from Athabasca University. And Catherine will share with us how she supports students to minimize procrastination, addresses the neurological deficits of time blindness, addresses student time management in a self-paced learning environment, and helps students mitigate the adverse behavioral outcomes of anxiety, guilt, and depression, as well as show us how she breaks negative feedback loops that often result in low self-esteem and poor performance. Catherine's program works to demonstrate and model skills that not all students may have, yet will need for future success. Catherine Butts is the Accommodation and Support Services Advisor at Athabasca University, working closely with colleagues and students to promote equity, student success, and self-reliance. Catherine carries a Bachelor of Science degree and Certificate of Animal Behavior from Dalhousie University, and a Master of Arts in Biological Anthropology from the University of Calgary. Outside of schooling, Catherine played varsity basketball, conducted paleontological research in northern Kenya, worked as a laboratory teaching assistant, and created a public outreach program for the Department of Anthropology and Archaeology at the University of Calgary. So with that said, I will now hand the presentation over to Catherine, and as they start their screen sharing and begin today's presentation.
Okay, hello everyone. Just give me 1 second. Alrighty. So hello and welcome everyone to my presentation, Schedule Building with Athabasca University. This is a preliminary project that the Accessibility Services Department at Athabasca University has been testing out with some of our students on building study plans. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge that where I am presenting from, Edmonton, Alberta, is located on Treaty 6 territory, and would like to offer respect to the histories, languages, and cultures of First Nations, Métis, Inuit, and all First Peoples of Canada. A little about me before we start. My name is Catherine Butts, and I currently work as the Accommodation and Support Services Advisor at Athabasca. Prior to this job, I graduated with my master's degree from the University of Calgary, where my thesis was reconstructing a fossil site in northern Kenya. This allowed me the privilege to travel there in the summer to participate in, as well as run my own dig site. The picture on this slide is actually an image of me working at one of these field sites on Rasinga Island in Lake Victoria. I began with ASD services in July of 2019 after my graduation. This was my first official exposure with working with students with disabilities, and it has been a very rewarding learning experience. It has also aided me in my personal life, as I do have a sibling that is diagnosed with Asperger's. I struggled with understanding his condition in my younger years, but after schooling and working with accessibility services, I finally understood his condition, and it worked on our communication, making our relationship a bit stronger. With that said, while this is not my direct field of educational background, I do feel that my exposure to a variety of academic environments from both the learner and instructor perspective has allowed me insight in how to navigate academia. Of course, I'm very open to suggestions wherever possible, because ultimately this is about the student and helping them to be successful. Just read this there. This talk will be presented in 3 sections. The first 2 have to do with the individualization of schedules. So why are the schedules needed and how are they built? And then it will end with an introduction of academic skills for post-secondary. How did this all start? I started providing this service in November of 2019, a couple months after I began at AU. A student asked for help in order to have some accountability in their courses, and I created a very quick and minimal schedule. Even something so simple seemed to really help boost their confidence, and they were able to complete their course within their contract. One of my official responsibilities at the university is to provide and process extensions for our students' courses. Before my arrival at the institution, these extensions were automatic, and I began to see students that had their courses extended by 6, 12, 16 months or longer with no coursework submissions. Rather than addressing the issues behind this lack of submission rate, it appeared as though our department was enabling this behavior. I also couldn't help but remember my brother's experience with the academic system. As someone that is time blind, he was unable to appropriately schedule his time, and at that moment received little to no support in this area. As a result, he dropped out of post-secondary. This, in addition to personally being a professional student for 8 years, I could understand this procrastination and sought to address the issue. After seeing the success of this first student and an overwhelming number of extension requests, I began to discuss with my superiors about the development of this program and received permission to begin. This brings me to the first section of our talk. Why are these schedules needed, and why are we not seeing course progress with extensions? First, we need to understand what is happening. Why are students delaying their studies? Procrastination has often been defined as a complex phenomenon with cognitive, affective, and behavioral elements that involves the intentional postponement of an intended course action despite the awareness of possible negative effects. Essentially, what this means is that procrastination is not a simple process to correct, and it is not influenced by its consequences. It takes a variety of factors in order for it to be corrected. Unfortunately, it is a common problem in post-secondary institutions with, unsurprisingly, negative association with academic performance. Procrastination in itself leads to adverse behaviors such as poor study habits, test anxiety, cramming, late submissions, a fear of failure, fear of social consequences, lower grades, a sense of guilt, and depression. And our students experience this in addition to having a disability that amplifies these negative behaviors, as well as inherently presents its own challenges, such as low energy levels, poor self-image, time blindness, reoccurring illness, eye strain, and heightened anxiety, and so many other factors that are individually unique. This can lead to a negative academic feedback loop. Messages I've received as a result include, I am not made for this, I can't do this, I am disabled, I am going to drop out, I'm not smart enough. Which is heartbreaking to hear when you know they possess the potential, but they have become so used to this negative self-image. So why is this happening? Of course, there is a mosaic of contributing factors that are unique to individuals, but two factors that I believe academia contributes are the levels of accountability and the communication of course requirements. The first issue, I believe, is that students are not taught in early education how to be accountable for their own academics. I'd like to preface this by saying that this is from my personal experience in the academic system and may not be reflective of all student experiences. High school students generally have someone to keep them accountable for their courses and coursework. They have things like weekly assignments, readings and discussions in small groups, instructor-graded pop quizzes, the constant reinforcement of assignment and exam deadlines, and individual attention. However, once they transition into university, they are required to keep themselves motivated with items like suggested readings, suggested practice problems, a few readings and discussions, but in a large class environment. Although they do have the reinforcement of a physical professor setting deadlines. This decrease in accountability is further amplified in institutions like Athabasca University, where the student is provided with bulk list objectives, suggested readings, suggested practice problems, suggested times to write their graded quizzes, and suggested assignment and exam deadlines. And the only true measure of accountability is the course end date. The second factor appears to be inaccurate course syllabi that do not accurately reflect the course requirements. The two primary obstacles I've come across since starting this program has been unclear instructions as well as a lack of upfront information. This is a quote from one of the students I had worked with. This student is a straight A single mother of two who completed their courses without any course delays. However, this particular course and the way it was communicated put up a barrier. They stated, "Part of what has confused me is the requirements for each part. I feel I discover something new and unexpected. I feel like I have failed to be proficient and attentive." Instructions can be unclear due to the formatting and wording of the assignments and syllabus. In this case, the student had been holding off on completing any work as they simply did not understand what was being asked of them. Due to their underlying disability, there was an emotional wall that kept them from being able to contact their course instructor. After reviewing the course, I also became confused, and I had to contact the course coordinator in order to verify the layout and expectations. If the syllabus had been outlining these requirements more clearly, this student may not have put off their course submissions and would have had more confidence when approaching the coursework. Additionally, courses can provide too little information on first glance. This course shows only 3 units, 2 quizzes, and 2 assignments, which could give the impression that this course is shorter or has less work than others. However, this is not the case. This slide shows what the first half of the course looks like. Rather than the initial impression of 3 units, 2 quizzes, and 2 assignments, the total translates to 16 lectures, 2 assignments, 2 quizzes, a midterm, and a final exam. Additionally, some courses do not communicate the unit weight information. So while this course is more accurately reflecting the number of units involved, it does not reflect the skewed requirements of each unit. For example, Unit 2 has 237 pages of reading, while Unit 5 has 50 pages. Many students reflect future unit requirements based off the first few units. This could lead them to believe that each unit is composed of 240 pages of reading, which is a very intimidating amount. This can skew a student's perception of how much work they need to complete in a certain amount of time. My first step in addressing these issues was to start holding the students accountable and helping them be self-reliant through the use of these schedules. The intention of these individualized schedules is to create goals for each month, week, and day in order to reinforce when something is to be completed, rather than just having a bulk list of objectives. By having a schedule implemented, the student has a better understanding of what is to be completed and what. This brings us to part 2 of the talk. How are these plans made? The process for these appointments and schedules is fourfold. The first step is giving the student a questionnaire. The student completes a survey and allows us to understand the individual needs and patterns of the student. I then move on to the assessment portion, which is the most in-depth portion. During the assessment, I break down the courses and begin to figure out a timeline for each requirement. This leads into the actual creation of the schedule. This is inputting these individual requirements into an easy to interpret calendar. Finally, I meet with the student in order to present their calendar and discuss academic skills, as well as address any questions. The first step, these questionnaires, are sent to the student before the meeting is scheduled. The questionnaire provides the student the opportunity to indicate exactly what they need help with, as well as allows the advisor to personalize the schedule for the student. This is based on things like what days do they like to work, where are they in the course, are they a funded student, and any other factors they may include. After receiving the questionnaire, I move on to the assessment of the student's needs. This is broken into two parts, the assessment of commitments and the calculation of time. First, we will discuss the assessment of commitments. This includes outlining of all course components and adding detail to the syllabus. This section is essentially turning what students see on their course websites into a clear course map. I like to include as much detail as I can, such as course weight, page numbers, assignment requirements, as these all contribute to the amount of time I assign to them, which will be discussed in the next section. This brings us to the second part of the assessment step, which is calculating the time commitments. This is where I take into account the questionnaire the student has provided. The first consideration is the actual number of days remaining in the courses. This begins by calculating the number of days left in the contract, as well as removing any days off. On the questionnaire, students with multiple courses are asked how they utilize their study days, whether they like to focus on one course at a time, or if they like to work on different courses on the same days, as this does adjust the amount of time for each course. If the student prefers to work on all their courses on the same days, then the actual days calculation remains the same. If the student prefers to work on one course each day, then the actual time is divided equally among these courses. Once I have these values, I begin to distribute the days between the course requirements. Based on my previous experience with courses, these are the general outlines I follow when assigning times. So final exams and final papers, approximately 2 weeks. Midterms and longer assignments, 7 to 10 days. Assignments, 1 to 3 days. And I recommend 1 to 2 days off a week. The remaining time is then divided equally among the units. Here, the term unit is used loosely. One of the reasons I like to write out all the page numbers of each unit is so that I can get a better understanding of its size. While some courses have lectures within their units, others have extensive and varied amounts of readings. For example, the two courses I've shown previously have different layouts and designations of course weight. The top course is more standard, with each unit being broken into subunits or lectures. In this case, I would consider the number of units as the number of course lectures. The bottom course is a bit different. While it has 6 units, the readings are unevenly distributed. Rather than calculate time for each unit, I like to distribute these days based on the amount of reading involved. I use measures of 10 pages as a measure of time, because statistically, students take about 2 to 3 hours to read 10 pages of text, as well as take good notes. In knowing this, I can have a good idea of the amount of time they will need to read in one day, as well as the number of days they should commit to each of the course sections. As mentioned in the little speech bubble, these are flexible. You will find that some lectures are extremely small, some assignments are smaller than others, the student may be halfway through an assignment or lecture already, or the student may indicate that the requirement will take longer than you, the advisor, thinks it will. These just give you a general guideline for starting to build the schedule. In order to accurately distribute a student's time with the amount of days remaining, I've created a course calculation tool using Microsoft Excel. This spreadsheet allows students to change their start and end date, the days off and total course requirements, and the requirement type, the number of requirements, and the time per requirement. This calculator then adjusts the amount of time that would remain for the course unit work. This allows the student to see how much time they would have for each requirement and allow them to adjust accordingly before starting the schedule. Here's an example of what it would look like if I had a student enter some values. As you can see, the time remaining adjusts based on the number of days assigned and distributes the remaining for each unit. So in this case, if they had a day per quiz, 10 days for a midterm, and 14 days for a final exam, they will have 6.5 days per unit. Once I've decided on a distribution of days I like, I move on to the actual schedule, which is part 3 of this process. I use Microsoft Excel as it has a calendar layout that is easy to read and manipulate. However, if anyone has any suggestions for something more accessible, I would be open to any input. When I move on to this section, I keep both my calculator and my course maps available, working my way through the course requirements as I go. I always start with general information, so it's easier to adjust later if need be. Using the course map and calculator, I start to distribute the days first by the unit, and then adding specific unit requirements later on. So in this case, I've added units and then chapter with page numbers that the student can focus on those individual days. Once I have settled on my arrangement of days, I color code them based on requirement type. In this case, blue is coursework, green is quizzes, orange is studying for a midterm, and yellow is what I call flex days. Flex days are meant to be days off, but they can also be used for catch-up. Then I add weekly and monthly goals. The daily goals are recommended uses of time. However, students always experience those days that for whatever reason, they're unable to work on the days that they are supposed to. That is why these weekly goals are so important. As long as they follow these goals, they're going to remain on task. Monthly reminders are the big goals that they work on and are marked in bold so that they can be aware that they're coming up. In this case, they are reminded to request their midterm well ahead of time and a date that they should be focusing on writing that actual midterm. This is an example of a plan I made for one student where they worked on individual days with multiple courses. Rather than the individual course requirements being a certain color, I've made the courses certain colors. You can also see in the weekly goals that I have defined them based on the course that they're working on. Alternatively, this was a schedule made for a student that wished to work on all of their courses each day. This is an uncommon occurrence, but I wanted to show it as an example as well. So instead of the individual courses being the ones that are color-coded, it is the individual requirements that are color-coded here. Finally, we're ready to have the meeting with the student. There are a few things to keep in mind before and during your meeting. The first being their comfort level. It is intimidating to speak with, in my case, an authority figure from the university. There are a few small things you can do to make the student more comfortable, such as sending the information on how to join the meeting ahead of time. This way, the student can make sure they know how to access the meeting, they can become familiar with the application, test their audio, and take a few moments to settle into the equipment. Another is opening with casual conversation. taking the time to ask them how their day's been, any weekend plans, anything you can do to relax them. Also take the time to discuss who you are, what you do, and explain that this meeting is to help them. Everything you discuss is for their well-being, so if they have questions or in the future, they are free to ask you. Oops. It is also important to keep in mind that the purpose of the meeting is if the student is having the meeting out of obligation or if they've requested it for their own benefit. This will prepare you on how the meeting may go moving forward, whether they're going to be an active participant or if they intend on simply listening. Always address your own experiences and whether or not your advice would accurately reflect the courses that they're taking part in. For example, my background is in the sciences. Therefore, some of my advice might not be most prudent for English courses or accounting. Finally, you need to be willing to be flexible. The student knows their pace better than you do. If you need to adjust the schedule or your advice, then you need to be willing to do so. This may mean taking notes on how they work, how long things take them, and adjusting the schedule and rebooking the meeting. This brings us to the final section of the talk, which is introducing these academic skills. This is not an in-depth introduction, but rather a baseline of skills and tips they may not have considered. These are the sections I go through during my discussions. Studying, writing, an other section that I also call Big Rocks and Little Rocks, and an other resources section that the students can access. First is addressing how to study. This can be a huge issue for students as it's not intuitive and it is a specialized skill that can take time to acquire. The important part of this section is to get students thinking about how they work and combining studying with different senses. The more of these senses a student utilizes, the easier these skills will sink in. This starts with discussing how to actively read academic materials. This section is to address how students should engage with the course material rather than just reading it. This moves into semantic learning. This includes utilizing mnemonic devices, comparing new material with information that the student has already obtained, and the importance of regular review. Next are discussions on acoustic learning, such as trying to explain a concept to a person or object, and the importance of visual learning, connecting a doodle with information. Finally, a discussion on other information, such as studying around a strong smell, like gum that they can bring into an examination room with them, the importance of taking breaks, and the importance of simulating a test environment. Next is a discussion on writing. I always preface this with stating that I am a scientific writer rather than somebody who writes English essays or accounting reports. While some information may not be applicable to their current coursework, the majority of this section does offer advice that can be utilized by most topics. This information includes things like reading assignment outlines before approaching textbook studies, how to organize your thoughts and reference materials, general writing advice, and what a grader wants to see in a paper from my previous experience as a course grader. Finally, I move on to my other suggestions section. Primarily, this section is advice on how to organize themselves, both through a study plan and through establishing and organizing their study space. This includes suggestions of overbooking their time, meaning if they feel something will take an hour, schedule it to take an hour and a half, keeping visible calendars, and trying to compartmentalize their study space from their living space. I also refer to this section as big rocks and little rocks. Big rocks are the large tasks that are typically procrastinated because they're so intimidating. These are things like exams, term papers, or something that just increases personal anxiety, such as composing an email to your course instructor. The small rocks are things that are easily accomplished and are usually used to procrastinate the big rocks. Things like writing notes, reading the text, and organizing papers. While these are important to coursework, they can be used as a mechanism to feel as though you're progressing in the course while not actually gaining any traction. It's also important to note that these rocks do not have to be just academic. Many of these are also personal and social goals as well. This section discusses how to break the big rocks into smaller rocks and writing them out into a list that the student can actively cross off. Not only is keeping them organized on a list a good way for the student to be aware of the work that's needed and to provide a constant reminder of course objectives, but it also supplies the student with a list of goals that they have already accomplished, which is arguably just as important. This can be used to ward off or hinder that anxious voice in the back of a student's mind that tells them that they have not done enough and need to start neglecting other important aspects of their life, such as sleep, in order to keep working. I then end these discussions with various resources that the student might find helpful. These are things like apps that block time wasters, such as Facebook and Instagram, note organizers, quiz generators, assignment calculators, which can be used to break big rocks into little rocks, student planning apps, other student suggestions, as well as Athabasca University resources they can utilize, such as mental health services, writing aids, and a wonderful coworker who offers students with text reminders of their goals, should they wish to pursue that option. I then email the student with their plan, as well as the information provided during the meeting, a blank copy of my course calculators, and a step-by-step how-to for building schedules. I recommend that they take time to let the information soak in, because usually it's me talking at them for an hour, and review it. Then if they have further questions, they are more than free to contact me. There are projects I would like to pursue should I be provided the opportunity. This includes having anonymous student feedback on the plans and meetings in order to adjust based on the student's input, providing open access webinars showing exactly how I create the schedules, future personal research on academic skills, metacognition, and disabilities. Currently, students meet with me once or twice to discuss these schedules. However, in future, I would like to provide a more consistent support to students that need it. I have had a positive experience with one student who requested monthly meetings for a while just to discuss what work they should be approaching and how to do so. I believe that just having that outlet to talk was extremely helpful for them to organize their thoughts, and half the time during these meetings, I barely said anything. I have also had students request this service over different semesters. However, due to the time commitment, I had to encourage them to approach the plan themselves. In these circumstances, I do offer short meetings and editing of the schedules they make. Currently, I only take on 2 or 3 student appointments a week due to the time commitment on top of my actual job. I would like to have more of these appointment times available should students need it. I would also like to run statistical analysis on this project, whether or not this does influence a student's academics, whether this does decrease the need for course extension, and whether there is a statistical distribution between students with disabilities and neuronormative students. And that is everything from me today. So I'm free to answer any questions.
Well, thank you so very much, Catherine. That information that you just shared, wow, it's quite extensive and quite a well-researched and put together support that you're offering the students at Athabasca. Just as we kind of give the participants a moment or two here to form their questions either into the chat window,
Mhm.
or I'm now going to allow participants, you should be able to unmute yourselves if anybody wants to join and ask a question by voice. And if you are asking questions by voice, what we'll do is as soon as we see your microphone on mute, then we'll call on you as in order. So again, I encourage those that are here with us today to input their questions either in the chat or unmute and share some of the information here with Catherine and help analyze it and be able to relate it back to yourself in your own situation. Because
Mhm.
Catherine, correct me if I'm wrong, Athabasca, the system that you guys use for the courses is effectively, it's totally self-paced, and
Mhm.
that the students
Yes.
have a set amount of time to do their courses like you were mentioning, but
Mhm.
other than an end date, there is nothing to guide them. So
Yeah, some courses will provide a suggested timeline, but it's often hard to read and hard to find. So a lot of the time it is just kind of sending the student on its way with a bulk list of objectives.
okay.
Hello.
Yeah, I was
Hi
just going
there.
to say, I see we have an unmuted microphone, so go ahead.
Oh, hi. My name is Chinedu, and I'm in Ottawa. So first, thank you so much, because like you identified, procrastination is a huge concern in school, and even with me as an adult learner. I
Mhm.
really liked your systematic approach to the question. My question though has to do with the way you've organized it, and I'm wondering what if you've noticed that the student's learning style or preference affects the way you use the Excel spreadsheet, or do you use the Excel as spreadsheet with every student? Do you have some other way of presenting the information?
So when I personally built the schedule, I use Excel a lot of the time.
Mm-hmm.
But as you said, not every student fits in this cookie cutter kind of thing. So a lot of the time I'll do it as a baseline for myself, and then I'll start adjusting things. So maybe I've assigned 3 small assignments 2 days each, but maybe one of those assignments is a little easier for them to understand. So I'll start allocating days to things that they might need more time with. So instead of one of those assignments being 2 days, maybe I'll make one of the assignment 3 days and one just 1 day.
Okay, so you use Excel for every student. You don't use any other tool for them. I guess it's the question.
Okay. Yeah, so I give them a like a Word document
Mm-hmm.
explaining everything I do, and then Excel is what I send to everyone. So if there's something that people find easier to use with technology or to understand with different students, I would love to hear the options.
Okay. Could I ask a follow-up question, and then I'll just get out of the way? At what point do the students graduate to creating this for themselves? So my understanding is you start by showing them the steps and creating the first one for them. A student who stays with you for 2 or 3 years, do they actually graduate to creating this for themselves, or do they always have to come to you?
Ideally, I would like them to kind of graduate to doing the schedules themselves, which is why I provide all the information to them. A lot of the time, I do find myself having 2 or 3 meetings with the student, but before the second and third meetings, I do ask them to approach it themselves first. This has been a short project so far, so we're still kind of seeing how it progresses. But those are definitely, if I can start providing longer term services and just kind of refreshing these skills with students as they go throughout their degrees, that would be great.
Okay, thank you. This has been really great. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Okay, if anyone else has any questions that they'd like to ask by voice, please unmute yourself, and we'll call on you and or enter the questions into the chat. And thank you, Shinadu, for those questions. You mentioned that you would allow some room for other people to ask questions, but if you do have other questions, don't hesitate to ask them as well. Um, so I I just looking through here, a couple notes that I took as you were going through, Catherine, is just the fact that this allows you to set some realistic expectations for the students. It was alluded to there from Shinadu that even mature students as well as I was going to say non-mature students. That's not that's not the way that I wanted that to come out. So the student population in general quite often has no reference point for what a realistic expectation of a university education, whether it's in class, traditional sitting in the seat, or whether it's an entirely
Hmm.
online experience such as Athabasca. They don't have anything to relate that to. And I noticed that, recall it during your presentation that you gave us an estimation of how many pages to read in how many hours.
Hmm.
Um, just how do you find that translates to the students and the fact that they have something that they can actually relate to and kind of, I guess, normalizing the experience for them? Any feedback?
Yeah, most of Athabasca's students are mature students. So many of them that I do talk with are people that work full time and are just doing this to get their degree on the side. So there is a lot of finessing when it comes to that. I think relating it back to actual time, such as the 2 to 3 hours statistic, does help them see that this is a longer commitment than what you would initially think. So when you think about reading 10 pages of any book, you might think that that's going to take you like 20, 30 minutes out of the way, done. Um, so I always recommend for students to time themselves and see how long it takes them to read 10 pages so that they can start thinking about how long something's going to take them.
Okay. So, and setting those expectations as well, because
Hmm.
they really don't know that that's normal. They might sit there for hours and hours.
Exactly. And there's nothing worse than sitting there and thinking something's going to take you 20 minutes and then you're sitting on hour 2 and you think you should be done by now. So it's always about telling them just make sure you overbook the amount of time so that you don't start stressing yourself out for taking extra time if you don't understand something.
Yes, and I know myself, and I can't, I would expect the majority of us on the call today and yourself, we quite often work with students with disabilities, and
Hmm.
those students themselves, it takes longer to do things
For
in a lot
sure.
of cases. But as well, if they don't have the schedule or an expectation communicated to them, such as you're able to do through this process, sometimes they may feel that the fact it takes them an hour to read a page, well, I see other people doing it in 10 minutes. What's
Hmm.
wrong with me? So I'm certain that it helps the students from normalizing it on that level as well.
Exactly. Yeah.
So just remind people if there's any additional questions to please enter them into the chat, or again, an opportunity to unmute your microphone if you'd like to ask by voice. And just I found one other thing quite interesting out of your talk. Well, found a lot of it, all of it interesting. But one other point that I just made note of here is the fact of the relationship building. And you
Hmm.
mentioned, I think that there were some students that had come back and had asked to meet with you over and over again.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, seems to be an important part of anything that any of us do in the student services is building those relationships. So
Yeah, for sure. I definitely have had some very, because it is scary. I'm somebody from their university institution telling them to meet with me, and that in itself is very anxiety inducing. So the sooner I can relate to them that I am a person and I'm just here to help you succeed, the better it is, and the easier that they'll start opening up to you and telling you exactly how they learn. And that way the schedule in itself can become a little bit better for them as well.
okay, exactly, and the big rocks and the little rocks and creating a balance in there as well for them. So yeah. Okay, I'm just want to give kind of a last opportunity here for anybody if they'd like to unmute themselves with comments or questions, or again into the chat with any questions here regarding the schedule building at Athabasca. And just while we're doing that, maybe if you could just summarize for me, for us here today, Catherine, the fact of how this came about again, and the fact
Hmm.
that this really, as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong if something's changed since you and I talked about this before, is this isn't your normal job.
Yeah, this is not a part of my actual job description. This is, I started seeing, as I said, students requesting a lot of extensions. So we offer our students 3 2-month extensions in order to complete their courses. And I was seeing well beyond that with no coursework submissions. And after speaking with some colleagues and my own personal experiences as a student and watching my brother struggle through academia, um, it is a real problem. And I didn't learn all these skills overnight. It was years, it was 8 years of me attending academic institutions and understanding how long things actually take someone. So if we can start relaying that information to the students that are just entering, it's going to be that much easier for them.
Yeah, there's no disagreement on that.
Yeah.
um, So, okay. Well, I'm not seeing any other questions coming in the chat. There's still
Hmm.
time if anybody does have anything that they'd like to comment or question on.
Yeah, and
I'm,
if they think of anything or any suggestions for technology, because I feel like that's a part that's really lacking on my end right now, my email's up, and I would be more than glad to receive that.
okay. And I was just going to mention as well that your email is on the screen there, and that so definitely to reach out. I'm just going to resume the screen sharing from my side here,
Hmm.
just as we kind of start to wrap up. And I just Um, there's a question here. Any chance of the recording and slides will be shared? And yes, they will be. They will be posted on the events website for the Network of Assistive Technologists, as well as a notification of that being sent out to all those who have registered for the webinar today. So, and and that's so. Yeah. All right. Catherine, this information just is it's fantastic. I wish there was somebody there to do what for me to do what you're doing for the students at Athabasca. I wished I could clone you and bring you and let you work with my students. And that's no disrespect to the people at my institution that work with students on this level. It's just the fact with your system and the dedicated time of you coming in, I can see this quite quickly taking off and becoming your full-time job, as well as quite quickly probably overwhelming you, and you'll have, I'm not sure, would those be considered little rocks or big rocks? Either way, I think you're going to run out of room for for the rocks very quickly once this catches on. So um, you were referred by one of your colleagues at Athabasca to me, and they a direct quote from them is that you are their magical time management unicorn.
Yes.
So, so I think you've earned that title and such, yeah, a lot of what you do is probably perceived by the students and even some of your colleagues as magical, but in reality, it's just building those skills that the individuals need in order to succeed, and the skills that so many of them more than you know don't come to a university with. So it's fantastic that you're able to do this for them, Catherine. And yeah, hopefully you'll keep us updated on what's going on with your
For sure.
project. And yeah, and I know that we've got a mixture of assistive technologists as well as learning skills or learning strategist type professionals on the session with us today. Um, Whichever end of this that we're approaching this from, the tools that you've just shared with us and the concepts, being able to put those into our toolboxes, yeah, it's going to be invaluable. I'm going to be selfish and ask you one last question that's probably on a lot of people's minds, and maybe some of them are just a little afraid to ask. Would you be willing to share any of your reference materials or a template of that schedule that you do create?
Yeah, I would have to try and finesse it so it is shareable, but yeah, I can definitely share some of that.
Okay, and anything you're comfortable sharing, because I know it's taken an awful lot of time and effort and resources and your personal blood, sweat, and tears as you moved around your big and little rocks to get that all put together. So if there's anything that you're willing to share with the greater technology and learning strategy community, we'd be happy to host that and post it up with the recording of the webinar. So, okay, so yeah, so as we close, I just again want to thank you very much, Catherine, for sharing today. Your support of the assistive technology and learning skills professions and the network of assistive technologists, it's greatly appreciated. As I mentioned earlier, please do keep in touch and keep us up to date on the progress of your project here. We look forward to continuing the collaboration. So. And lastly, for everyone else here today, again, thank you for joining us. And remember, you can't spell education without AT. And until next time, take care and stay safe.